All right. I'm now joined by New York Meg's Eric Levitz, who's been on the show before and who's written some very depressing stuff in the last couple of days about the long-term meaning of the election results this week. To the extent that we know those results, which is significant but not total. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing all right. I owe a lot of hours to my body's sleep system, but hanging in there. And I think this is the last thing I need to do before I can give my mind a rest and possibly some inebriation. So
yeah, no, that's a good idea. I will not too much because I want to be coherent and hear everything you have to say. But
yeah,
I just got back to so I will start a little bit. I just got back to East Lansing, got this bottle of Japanese whiskey from friend of the show, Eric Kelly. Thank you, Eric. So I guess let's start out with the part that's going to instantly date this conversation, and which is that since we're talking on Friday at 5, we're in this like weird state of still sort of being in purgatory, but also basically knowing what's up. So we have, I'm looking at it, and everything that's still not officially called, except for Alaska, which doesn't matter, is at 90 something. And it seems like Biden is going to win the rest of those. But again, nothing's been called yet.
Yeah. I've seen some, Steve Kornacki saying that there's maybe a little bit more GOP vote out in Pennsylvania than previously thought. But my understanding is that everyone thinks that it's not enough, and that that basically Biden is very likely to win all of the remaining states, and that for that reason he's almost certain to win enough of them to get to 270. So I think it's
Arizona and Nevada would do it, or even Pennsylvania would do it on its own without those two.
Yeah, it seems like he has Nevada, so then he just needs Arizona, Georgia, or Pennsylvania. Seems like he's winning all of them. So
all right, fair enough. And the legal challenges mostly seem to be bluster.
Yeah, well, it seems my understanding that the only like halfway coherent legal challenge that they had set up, and that the Supreme Court had that 4-4 ruling on, was about these extensions for the mail ballot deadlines, right? So in Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court, out of concern for these the Postal Service mail delays due to the pandemic, said that if your ballot is postmarked by Election Day but it arrives like 3 days later, that vote still counts. The Republican-controlled state legislature's view is that the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to do that. That under the U.S. Constitution, which supersedes the Pennsylvania one, it's up to the state legislature to decide the rules of elections. That was what they split 4-4 on. But the subset of uncounted vote that is late ballots that are coming in 3 days after is minuscule. Not that many votes came in late, so it doesn't really. I think they're going to push a legal challenge, but it seems like
even if they win, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, and it's possible that they actually will be in a position where they really want those ballots counted, because those ballots will be counted last, and Biden will be up, and so fighting the counting of them would just doom Trump's campaign. But they're in a sort of really incoherent, I think mostly public messaging focused. I think that the goal is primarily to mitigate Trump's narcissistic injury and like brand integrity as a winner, to just propagate the idea that it was stolen. It's more about whining, I think, than actually changing anything.
Yeah, right. So, given that, and assuming that any of the sort of apocalyptic predictions that you've gotten from some places about what Trump would do don't pan out, then that does mean that Biden wins. But as you point out, this is kind of the focus of both of the things you've written about this since the election. It's also not quite certain, but very close to certain the Republicans are going to control the Senate.
Yeah, I would maybe say that they're probably gonna. I think that the odds are very strongly in their favor. At the same time, it's not like we have like a ton of past experience with like this, with special elections that would determine the control of the Senate that are taking place during a pandemic,
Right.
with a Republican president still in office who is shouting all the time about how elections don't matter because they're rigged. Or I don't know. Just I just wrote a little thing, which maybe is wishful thinking, but it's just like Trump and his family right now are telling his base basically that, you know, voting is kind of for suckers because like the elections are rigged,
Right.
and also telling them that the Republican Party is stabbing them in the back by not more uniformly backing up Trump's claims of voter fraud.
Which makes it hard to argue that people should get out to vote for down ballot Republicans.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's crystallizing for me, and that maybe I didn't give enough consideration in my my main sort of depressing take on the election, is that I think the big question that hangs over American politics right now, or one of them, is what happens to turnout once the president ceases to be like a celebrity provocateur. Because what we've seen in the both 2018 and 2020 had the highest. It was the highest midterm turnout in a century, and then the highest general election turnout in a century. Trump has brought a good number of voters in off the sidelines, people who were politically disaffected, but you know, either knew The Apprentice or knew Donald Trump. I mean, he made politics fun enough for people who already had shared some of his cultural resentments to get engaged and to get out. One interpretation, I need to see more data to establish this, but one interpretation of what's happened and why Republicans have done well is that Trump is a bad general election candidate in the sense that a lot of longtime Republican-leaning voters he alienated, right? And so they voted for Biden, but then voted Republican down ballot. But he's a good general election candidate in the sense that he brought these other voters off the sidelines who then voted straight ticket Republican. And so that hurt him, but arguably maybe he actually like helped Republicans do better down ballot than they would have with the generic Republican by bringing these new voters in. So now the question is like, okay, Trump's out. Does that mean that the voters he mobilized go away? Or is it an even symmetrical decrease in both parties' turnout? Or will those voters stay, but Democrats, a certain category of Democrat who was like really riled up about Trump is going to stop participating as much, and then Republicans are really going to dominate. It's unclear, and it does seem to me like in Georgia, Trump is not currently spreading the best message for it, to maintain Republican turnout in the face of Democratic enthusiasm potentially.
Yeah, I was actually just commenting earlier today to somebody in my family that it's kind of bitterly funny since I just moved back to Michigan from Georgia. My wife and I both still have jobs in Georgia, but we're doing them online now anyway. And when we moved back, I had the thought, it's like, oh well, this is just as well because it's not impossible that Georgia could flip, but come on, I mean Michigan, like surely the margin's going to be so much tighter, that the vote does more good here. Then it turns out that Biden won Michigan by like 150,000 votes, and it looks like the last time I neurotically refreshed the page, Biden was ahead in Georgia by like 1,000 votes, something insane like that. And then of course there's the special election coming up. So anyway, I was very wrong about that. But I guess I am curious about so two things. One is backward looking, one's forward looking. The backward looking thing is what could have been maybe with a different candidate or a different strategy, and the forward looking thing is given that it's Biden, and given that that short of things going surprisingly well with the special election, that that it's going to be Biden and a Republican Senate, which is in some ways, I think, certainly for anybody who's well to the left of Biden, the most frustrating possible combination, because it means that there's this weird gray zone where from now on, anything that Biden does that we don't like, there's this instant baked-in excuse, which isn't even always an excuse, right? Sometimes it's true, which is, well, sure, but that's the only thing he could possibly have done. What else could he? What else could he do? The Republicans are controlling the Senate. Mitch McConnell has veto power over his Senate appointments. Et cetera. So it's very hard in that environment to make make a case that's not just going to convince the choir, but that's going to convince a larger number of people that for left criticisms of that, right? I mean, even certainly that was the case for a lot of the Obama presidency, and that really stuck. I mean, I think even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said something recently about how, Obama, she sort of split the difference and said maybe it wasn't as progressive as I would have liked, but really he did the best that he could have because of the Republicans, and that's a very common sentiment, even among people who hate other centrist Democrats. And I'm sure part of that is because Obama, people have more positive feelings about him for all sorts of reasons, right? But a big part of it is this idea that he's not really to blame for anything that happened, because what could he have done, with Republican obstructionism, right. and it seems almost certain that that's going to be the situation going forward.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think that as far as the backward-looking thing, I don't know that I have that much to say about that, because I think that I think it's very hard to, we're in such bizarre circumstances to begin with, add in like a Democratic Socialist as the Democratic Party nominee into everything else that's really strange about this electoral environment. And I don't know. I think what I referenced earlier, I have been in writing and generally, a little bit skeptical of the Bernie Sanders avowed theory of victory, which was to, transform the electorate through political revolution, high turnout. On the one hand, the fact that Trump being an unusual general election candidate catalyzed high turnout, you could point that in Bernie's direction. On the other hand, the fact that the most high turnout election since 1908 resulted in massive Republican down ballot victories, with a lot of voters being willing to vote for Joe Biden, but not other Democrats, militates in the other direction. So I don't.
Yeah, I mean, sure. No, I get that. I mean, I think that we can't, short of having the device from Rick and Morty that lets you watch TV from other dimensions, and using that to watch the alternate news. I think you certainly can't be sure. I also think, I mean, the finicky thing that I'd say, and I'm sure anybody who wants to look up my old post can find 10,000 examples of me saying this in a very unnuanced way, right? Like that, Bernie would have won in 2016. Bernie would be a better candidate for 2020. But of course, if you're going to do the several sentences nuanced thing, then I think you have to admit that, one, that introduces so many possible complications that there's just some butterfly effect stuff going on there, and who knows. Two, I think that the precedent from the last general election in the UK, where of course Corbyn and his team made plenty of mistakes that are their fault, but also it's a matter of public record that a lot of centrists in the Labour Party were actively trying to undermine the effort because they figured they had a better chance of being rid of Corbyn, if he wasn't prime minister. I think there's a real chance, for example, that could have happened. I think that there are all sorts of things that could have happened, all sorts of different versions that would have meant he won or lost. Right. But I do think that I'd be very resistant about going too quickly from the idea that this is a very high turnout election, and Biden still he got the he won the popular vote, of course, but we've been waiting in suspense for days, to find out, definitively whether he won the electoral vote, that I can see why people think, oh, well, that means that it isn't true, that higher turnout activated non-customary voters would have meant that somebody like Bernie would have won, because look, Biden is pretty centrist, and he barely won, with really high turnout. So, obviously that's not true. I think that the reason that I find that a little unconvincing is that it sort of assumes that the question is, what are like the fixed ideological preferences of some big pool of non-voters? And I think that's the wrong way to think about it, because I think most of the people that you're talking about don't necessarily have really strong fixed ideological preferences. That most people who don't customarily vote aren't obsessed with the news like weird people like us are, and they have political impulses, but those political impulses can pull them in different directions under different circumstances. And so I think one very telling data point that you mentioned in one of your articles was that Trump won Florida, but the $15 minimum wage resolution won by more than he did, which makes it mathematically impossible there weren't people who were voting for Trump and that. Now, none of that's to say that Bernie Sanders would have hypothetically won Florida, because clearly the Miami Cuban factor, would have really worked against him. But I mean, it is suggestive of the thinking about somebody who'd vote for Trump and vote for the $15 minimum wage thing, right? That might even be somebody who maybe even likes some of the racist stuff with Trump, but they also like the idea of a $15 minimum wage. And sure, it said on Biden's campaign website that he was for, and it came up at the second debate, the one where people got to complete sentences. But it certainly wasn't, even to the very limited extent that Biden campaigned, which he kind of didn't, right? I mean, he had a very light schedule, but even to the extent that he did campaign, he wasn't campaigning on that or policy things really. And particularly when you do try to play out that scenario to the extent that we can of Bernie as the candidate, you're imagining somebody who has the advantage, is like extremely associated in the public mind with one issue, right? Which is Medicare for all. Yeah. And you're imagining somebody who is super associated with that one issue running at a time when millions and millions of people were losing their private health insurance, and because we're at the same time as we were undergoing an unprecedented health emergency. So I don't know that he would have won, but it doesn't seem implausible. Like, at the very least, it would have been a really interesting test.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it would. I have no strong opinion on it either way. I would say I recognize the points that you made, and mostly think they're all pretty reasonable. I think that the confounding factors are about, to me, like just I agree with these longtime non-voters that there's disaffected non-voters, and this particularly like low trust voters. There is some establishment Democratic operatives I've spoken to have identified as far as what is Bernie Sanders' inter-election strength? Why is he he's generally pulled a little bit behind Biden in these polls, for whatever they're worth. But why, when he's losing, higher income voters, how is he maintaining relatively close? And it is this sort of category of really disaffected people with low trust in institutions and society. There is an inchoate, largely working class voting bloc that part of Sanders' anti-establishment sort of thing resonates with, and that there's a potential there to mold that into an ideological worldview that is compatible with the left project. But the issue is just about the institutional weakness of the left, right, in my opinion, as far as do these voters have fixed ideological preferences? I'm not sure. Very few people do, I think. And these specific kinds of voters are kind of disorganized, so probably not. But what institutions are shaping and channeling their inchoate, views, and where do they trust? Like, in a lot of these communities, right wing talk radio and Fox News have hegemony, where left media is not really a big presence. The trade union movement is, either was there once or never was. And so, as far as you activate these voters, are they going to get, Fox News's understanding of what Bernie Sanders stands for? Are they going to be taught to see him as, a guy who wants to, get rid of all the police and open the borders and
Right.
whatever, or are they going to see the message that Sanders wants to put out, this universalist, whatever. So I just don't know. I just, and the big thing is that I think the left has an accurate perception that the media landscape is hostile to it and has significant influence. And I think that has to, that is a complicating factor for its theory about conventional electability not being real, because if the media has the power to make it real, or whatever, just you see what the British media did to Corbyn.
Right.
And it's just I don't think it's dispositive. Sanders was able to win a lot of votes with hostile media going against him, but it is just a fact of the world that I don't know.
No, that all, yeah, right. I mean, I think your point about the weakness of the union movement is particularly important, because I like the gamble with Sanders was that you could sort of do things the other way around, right? That looking at successful labor and socialist parties in other parts of the world, that you tend to start out with a pretty well organized working class, and and have that rise from it, or at least have the two grow together. Whereas in this case, the hope was that you could start with the electoral, very high level electoral thing, and use that to jumpstart grassroots movement. Which, whatever you think about whether that could have worked, right? It didn't, and I think a big part of the problem, right, is exactly that institutional question, that that there are so few media institutions, get out the vote institutions, anything that would be relevant to that kind of effort. And I think you also saw that something else you pointed out in one of your post-election articles was about Prop 22 in California, which in a different way is a result of the same thing, I think, because talking to people I know who live in California, it seems like my impression is that people didn't I'm sure there are people, whatever, obviously, we're talking about an incredibly large group of voters, right? Lots of people have lots of different motivations, but that there was at the very least a big chunk of people who voted for that who didn't understand at all what they were voting for. That the propaganda was that this is good, this is somehow something to help drivers, but I think that the pessimistic thing there is what you're talking about the institutional problem, because if there was some sneaky right-wing ballot initiative that had really misleading language that was somehow going to make it harder to get an abortion in California, I guarantee you that every remotely progressive person who lives in the state would know what was what, right? And it would have gone down in flames, but it didn't, right? And a lot of that has to do, I think, with the weakness of the labor movement and other left institutions, that could have gotten the word out about that more effectively. And that does point to something kind of bleak, I think, which is that, even if you think, like I do, that the Bernie gambit, came close to working, I tend to think that if the Democratic establishment hadn't learned their lesson from the failures of the Republican establishment to stop Trump in 2016, then it might have worked if the centrists hadn't done what I'm sure establishment Republicans wish they'd done in 2016 and all consolidated behind Marco Rubio or something. Right. But whatever you think about that, there is another problem going forward, which is that unless somebody invents some miraculous anti-aging treatments, Bernie Sanders is not running for president again. And it's not at all, even if we were to try that gambit again, even, whatever, assuming there'd be some sort of opening because Biden was only going to serve one term and whatever, it's deeply unclear who could possibly fill that role. Like somebody like AOC doesn't have anything like the national approval numbers for that to be plausible, I think. And so something that you kind of say in your most recent article, and unfortunately, I really don't want to believe it, but I tend to believe it because the range of people that I listen to, going from say you to Matt Chrisman, and the Grill Stream all kind of said some version of this, which is that as frustrating as it is, sort of coming down from the dizzying heights of the left almost winning a presidential nomination contest, really looks like any kind of plausible left, meaning left of the Democratic establishment, electoral strategy in the next few years is going to have to be on a much more local level. I mean, you even kind of suggest that you even kind of suggest that like maybe the sort of the best shot for a lot of issues is something like what you say, you call states' rights progressivism.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think I prefaced that section of the article by saying like my main aim was to be diagnostic, as like what happened and what are the implications likely to be. I felt like it would be kind of shitty to lay out this depressing analysis and like offer nothing prescriptive, but I also didn't have a lot of time to really think through. So I some gut intuitions were like, maybe I should back up and just explain why I think that the outlook is so bleak.
Yeah.
So, and I want to disclaim everything by saying, talking about what's going to happen politically years in the future, like it's a hubristic sort of exercise. If the view from 2010 of what 2020 was going to look like politically, I think a lot of things would not have gone anticipated, right? I mean, if you look at just 2012, at the bipartisan interpretation of that election, which never had much grounding, but the bipartisan interpretation was that Republican Party needs to embrace comprehensive immigration reform, move sharply left on immigration, or else they're going to lose Latinos. And what do? They embrace the most xenophobic candidate they've ever put up in the modern era, and increase their share of the Hispanic vote. So nonetheless, I do think that there are some long-running structural trends that are working against the Democratic Party. They're going to be tough to reverse in the near future. One of them is, the big one, almost all the problems proceed from the existence of states. Like basically we've divided the country up into these 50 largely arbitrary geographic areas, and it so happens that there's just a lot more of them that are like largely empty, save for a lot of whatever. They're predominantly there are great people, great things in all of these states, and I'm not saying that conservatives can't be great people like individually in their life, but what I'm saying is they're terrain that favor conservatives in the United States and in most other countries. These are very white, very rural areas in a time of urban-rural polarization in our country and in most Western democracies. This creates a situation where the Senate, the tipping point state in the Senate, the seat that, whatever, the state that you win a race there and you secure 51 votes is 6 points at least to the right of the nation as a whole. So we don't do Senate elections this way, but like as a way of just abstractly picturing it, it's like whatever, Democrats need to win a 6-point national landslide in order to end up with a Senate majority, with a chance at a Senate majority.
Just to interject, because people in the chat were asking, the article that we're talking about is called "The 2020 Election Has Brought Progressives to the Brink of Catastrophe." Yep.
And so you see this in terms of so basically there's always been this bad situation, and then politics has become more nationalized. One study suggests that like the spread of broadband internet into rural America, increasing the number of Americans who have access to the panoply of information that the internet provides, rather than just local evening news and local journalism, has made people in rural areas less likely to vote for Democrats down ballot because they happen to like this particular Democrat. It's made them more ideologically coherent in their behavior. And then also just rural urban polarization has been intensifying, somewhat due to decisions Democrats have been making, but somewhat due seemingly to generational drift and secular change. To a lot, I think, of our problems are the product of mistakes that Democrats made a couple decades ago, or beyond, really, like not passing labor reform, but a bunch of stuff where it's just like it's kind of baked into the political economy now as this landscape that's very bad for the left, broadly defined, in the most loose. But yeah, so that hurts in the Senate. It hurts then also, though, state legislatures. Now Republicans control way more state legislatures, which means they get to draw more House maps, which means it's harder for us to win the House. Harder for the Democrats to win the House. And so then finally we have the Electoral College happens to be in a place that the Electoral College is less inherently biased against the left, but in this particular point in time, there's all these states that are about 3 or 4 points right of the country that are very evenly, very closely contested, divided, and have a lot of electoral votes, where basically they're 52% Republican states in like kind of a neutral national environment. And that creates a problem in the Electoral College, with the winner-take-all nature of that. So that's the baseline. The other thing is just that if Biden is president, the best map that Democrats have in the Senate, the one that has the most Republican incumbents up on the ballot, is 2022. That's the cycle where the Senate's divided kind of such that because of the 6-year terms, right? There's like 3 different cycles, distinct cycles of seats that are up. 2022 is our best chance for gains. But if Biden is in the White House, then a similar dynamic. This has been reversed like only, I think, once in modern history after 9/11. George W. Bush, as a first-term president, was able to gain seats in the midterm. But generally speaking, there's this really hard-to-fight dynamic of the president's party getting complacent, the voters, a certain category voter who's like not that interested in politics, getting sort of complacent when they have power, and the other side just fuming for 2 years, having lost the presidential election and wanting to get back out there and get vengeance and correct the situation.
And it's particularly hard to imagine that the combination of Biden and Republican Senate would reverse that dynamic, because like we were talking about earlier, whatever you believe about what he wants to do, I'm pretty skeptical, but even if you believe that everything that's on his campaign website is stuff that he would actually, all else being equal, push to do, the Senate issue makes not all of it, but a lot of it moot.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be, we'll see, but it's pretty plausible that McConnell said today that the jobs report today proved that we only need a little bit more stimulus. This is really targeted, which, if that line succeeds, there's going to be mass layoffs of public sector workers. The city I live in is going to be in a lot of trouble. Small business failures. I mean, the fucking pandemic is not anywhere near contained. Right. We're not anywhere near through So, if McConnell comports himself the way that he did in 2009, which was, structuring his actions around the insight that the American public, to the small fraction of the American public that swings, tends to hold the president's party accountable for conditions in the country. So there is this inbuilt motivation towards sabotage, whereas, passing major bipartisan legislation will lead these voters to think, hey, the president's doing a good job. Look, he brought people together and got something done. McConnell's insight was that that's the way things work. And so that when there was early GOP interest in getting on board with the Affordable Care Act, because it incorporated some conservative notions about how to reform healthcare, he nipped that in the bud. Yeah.
I mean, the core idea was arguably, even if the version of it was very different, right? But like the core idea of mandating, but not for the most part directly providing health insurance. That was something that the Heritage Foundation had previously supported. Newt Gingrich at one point supported that.
Yeah, the Obama version of it was much more liberal as far as Medicaid expansion was. It was sort of the opposite of what the Heritage's goal was. But yeah, right? It incorporated. It was. Above all, it was an attempt to find a way to make things a little bit less bad without upsetting any major healthcare lobby. Which is maybe not Republicans' ideal reform, but like the kind of reform they could get behind possibly. Right. But yeah, so I don't know. I think there's a good chance that Biden doesn't deliver on anything that he promised. That the Senate starves the economy of the stimulus that it needs to not have high unemployment, and that the Republican base is fuming for 2 years about the stolen election, and maybe that depresses turnout, but maybe it energizes it. And anyway, if you don't gain seats in 2022, then in 2024, Joe Manchin, Sherrod Brown, John Tester, these red state Democratic senators who hung on in 2018 in a national environment that favored Democrats by 8 points, but they barely hung on. And if you do like a uniform sort of neutral election year 2016 environment, they all lose. So I mean, I don't want to make this too like politics isn't physics,
Right,
but in terms of just like our baseline, like what is likely? How is this likely to play out based on the information we have? You play it out, and it's like, the Senate is probably gone, or the Senate could plausibly be gone for a decade. And we have had periods in this country where one chamber of Congress was just locked up by one party, and that was just the way it was. And I think that we're looking at that again. So then you look, so just looking at 2024, the fact that Republicans are about to have control of full control of 22 state houses, while Democrats control 9 ahead of redistricting, that's going to be performed on the basis of a census that Trump kind of rigged, or at least was very shoddily conducted and probably is undercounting Democratic constituencies. You have an electoral college map that's still probably about 4 points biased towards Republicans, still probably in 2024. And you've got the Senate situation is just like, Republicans are in a pretty good position, and they've got the 6-3 Supreme Court to strike down any ambitious regulatory thing that Biden tries to do. If you're a Republican operative, getting rid of the Mad King now and setting up the chessboard for the next decade like this seems great. Seems good enough anyway. I think that's part of why they're not all rallying behind Trump's voter fraud stuff. Is this setup works pretty well.
They kind of got a lot of what they wanted from him. They got the Supreme Court appointments. There's not. It's not obvious that they've got a lot of advantage to keeping him around. I saw something from CNBC the other day saying that like the Wall Street reaction to the prospect of Biden as president of Republican Senate is pretty enthusiastic, because say, hey, definitely not getting taxes aren't going up, but at the same time, there's less political instability, and the coronavirus will probably be handled in a more competent way. So, what's not to like? And which does, at least, in a very, very short-term way, like there might be one good consequence of that, which is that even if they do come up with a less ridiculous legal challenge, that does mean that even with the 6-3 Supreme Court, there's less built-in incentive for conservative Supreme Court justices to find ways of agreeing with whatever ridiculous legal challenge they come up with to the election, and plausibly think, okay, well, look, we need to, it would be useful at least to store up some political credibility for this institution. Why waste it on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think even. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I just don't think that they're, in addition to everything else that we talked about, just in terms of like iron law of institutions or whatever, like Trump didn't have, I mean, they did really well with Trump, and it's not like he had like an alternative infrastructure, like group of like policy intellectuals and stuff that displaced, he didn't take jobs away from too many conservatives, but nonetheless, he was a power center that did not come out of the established conservative institutions, did not rise up through their ranks, was fundamentally an interloper. And now that they have a 6-3 Supreme Court majority, so long as they take the Senate, this is a pretty low-cost way of getting rid of the interloper and reconsolidating control over the institution of the Republican Party. I mean, it's going to be there's a lot of Trumpist and QAnon people rising up. I mean, they don't have the corporate, the long term, the established wing of the party does not have a firm grip on it by any means. But I think that they probably see an upside in Trump passing, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is basically unknowable, but just for fun, assuming that it is all called for Biden, how much of that stuff you just kind of referred to, the like QAnon street level, like strange fascists in the backwoods of Michigan, who get stoned and talk about kidnapping the governor, how much activity from people like that do you actually expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I know that somebody got arrested this week who was planning to had AK-47, was planning to go to the Philly Convention Center where they're counting the votes, and I mean, Trump's already with Caesar Sayak, right? He's already inspired one failed, pretty large scale, domestic terrorism attempt, not very well executed, but I don't know what the odds are on it, but it seems to me just the number of guns and the amount of, it is like more direct incitement to violence from a larger platform than we've seen before. Will the fact that Biden is like an old white guy be a little bit less like agitating than if like it was Harris who was becoming president? I don't know, but I mean, we have so many mass shootings in the country just on a normal situation.
Right.
Will we get one like directly Trump-inspired mass shooting? I think decent chance. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also possible to. I mean, I do agree with you, by the way, that the scale of stuff to worry about is like the mass shootings that we have routinely anyway. That like maybe a couple of them will be political, but it is also I mean, I think that I don't buy any of the hysteria about civil war or any of that stuff, but I do. But that said, I do often wonder, right? Like even back several months ago, when there was the massive, armed protesters at the Michigan State Capitol. I just remember thinking, like, anybody who listens to Mike Duncan does this Revolutions podcast where they'll do like a season on the French Revolution, season on the Haitian Revolution, whatever, and a phrase that's been used like I think at least a dozen times over the course of the several seasons of that podcast was somebody fired a shot, nobody knows who, and I just keep thinking about that, right? Like, what are the odds that you can get a lot of not very well trained people, brandishing weapons and being excitable, and not at some point get a situation where somebody fires or somebody thinks someone fires and something horrible happens, which is not to say that it would lead to any like larger calamity. It would just be like I think if it did, it would probably be like a small tragic event where, a few dozen people died or something. But it's almost weird that it hasn't yet.
Yeah, no, I think, there's so many ways in which we've been lucky just as a, whatever, like, this is very, very A to C, but I just always think of just like, I feel like the giant nuclear stockpiles all over the globe are kind of this like Chekhov's like atom bomb that is like, we're going to forget about it for a few decades. Like eventually, like there's so many near like misses there. That's going to be a problem again at some point. But
if we, right now this is just for YouTube, but if we take off the audio and release it as a bonus episode in the podcast feed, it's definitely going to be called Chekhov's atom bomb. That's too good not to use.
Yeah. But I would say that, like I feel like the Civil War stuff is overhyped. I think that, right, like discrete lone wolf acts of mass violence. But I do think there's also like a fracturing. I don't think it's going to be civil war, but is there going to be like kind of like a de facto collapse into like a heightened form of federalism? I think that's more, and that's kind of what I'm referencing with the states' rights thing. Progressivism, I never explained that point, but just that like the Democratic coalition, the coalition in which the left has like any influence whatsoever, is, like we've been talking about, systematically underrepresented in America's political institutions, but it is also like overrepresented in political power in the places, the centers of American economic power, right? Because we control the big cities and we control California, which, right, it's like the world's 5th largest economy or something. That might be hyperbole, something, but it would be a significant nation state.
Right.
And obviously the Democratic Party there is, it is not a social democratic institution.
Right.
Right, but the left has shown more success in winning primaries against Democrats and kind of working their way up into power than they have, taking over the Democratic Party at a national level and beating Republicans at a national level. So it just seems a little bit more thinkable that, like, if California could start asserting just more regulatory autonomy and then using the size of its market to force like corporations to de facto embrace its regulatory requirements for their products, because you're not going to make a product that you can't sell in California. This is like sort of what's happened with the vehicle emission standards, but that could be a model for something broader.
Yeah, and I mean, it's frustrating on some level because there are things that you just couldn't do this way, I think, or at least you couldn't do them in the same way, certainly, that you could do them nationally. So,
and it creates risks, right? For like if we do normalize nullification of federal laws,
right.
That has implications for African Americans in Mississippi, right? So it's I don't know.
Yeah. So they're right. Sure. No, that makes sense. Also just pragmatically, as you point out in the article, it has already happened to some extent, certainly on the weed issue. There has been de facto nullification all over the place already. But actually, coming back to Michigan, I remember, first day I was back here, driving past this big billboard for marijuana delivery, 5 minutes away from where I grew up, thinking, God damn it, all the time I spent sneaking around in high school, and now, there's a big billboard for delivery. But yeah, I think that, again, the frustrating thing is that I think there are issues where you could potentially do that and have either, as you point out, like with the emission standard precedent, right? That you could kind of do de facto national regulation with a big enough state, or there are maybe other issues where you could, you might even be able to provide some social services on a state level that would be that would at least be like maybe an inspiring model. It's like, oh, hey, if I lived in California, I would get X, right? Provided by the government.
No, actually, that's the more like constitutionally sound, actually, and like California. The other thing that was mentioned earlier was these referendas that failed, like Prop 22 going against the left. It is the case that, like, in terms of like what the corporate media and everything else can do with their hegemony, that in Colorado and Vermont, single payer failed badly. I think that's partly the messaging and partly that it is a different proposition on the state level, when you don't have monetary sovereignty and physical whatever. But California has the scale to do single payer. There's no real reason why California can't do state level single payer, in my view, if it gets the right waivers from the federal government.
The only objection the only reason I would think that it couldn't is just that that if you're going to literally do single payer as opposed to a state public option, which they could totally do, then I don't know how that would work with like the interstate commerce clause. If I don't know that California could legally get away with banning the sale of private insurance in California.
Sure. Yeah. But you could do, you could do a public health insurance option that was so heavily subsidized.
Which would be fantastic, right?
Yeah.
That would be great, right? If they did that.
Right.
Just, making the finicky point that it wouldn't be quite the same thing.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. Well, I hope so. This is pretty grim, and I know that some people don't necessarily want to hear this right now because they're enjoying or almost enjoying or having some combination of anxiety because we don't 100% know yet, and enjoying the relief of Donald Trump having lost the election, but I do, I do think you need to start from being real about where you are to start thinking about the possibilities for the future. But I know, I know you said you're very tired and you want to have a drink and, finally relax. So I do want to let you do that. Just real quick before you go, I see that earlier this afternoon, I did read the two previous articles that you'd written. The already mentioned 2020 elections brought progressives to the brink of catastrophe, and the previous Biden has a good chance of winning and having a dreadful presidency. But I see that there is a new one that went up just as we were setting up the stream, called Will Trump's Lies About Rigged Elections Caused the GOP Senate Control. So I take it that one is
I was kind of outlining the argument earlier, yeah. Trump, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I do want to say, yeah, I do want to say that, like, when I started the other piece, it didn't look like Ossoff was going to make a runoff, and so that's why it's the brink of catastrophe. Because there's still, it would be shitty to have like just a 50 vote majority where you need to dance around, Manchin and Sinema, but there's stuff you could do, and there would be stuff to fight for, and like you said at the beginning, there would be clear culpability in terms of maybe it's just one member of the Democratic Party, but it's like, hey, you guys have the power to abolish the filibuster, give DC statehood, give Puerto Rico statehood, give yourselves more power. You have the power to, it would be really nice to like actually be able to, but I also just want to say that I don't begrudge anyone. I feel relief that Biden is probably, going to win. And I think it is I think that it creates all kinds of challenges, but I would rather be in a world where Donald Trump does not have executive power. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thanks so much, Eric.
Yep. Thank you.